قلنا إذا انشرط صدق الله العظيم. And that brings us to the 14th verse in the 110 verses of the riveting story of Surah Al-Kahf. Last week we ended off with the sentiments where Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says in the Hadith Qudsi that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Man atani yamshi ataytuhu harwalatan." Whoever comes towards me crawling, then I go towards him leaping. That you have to take the first step, you have to make the action, and then you see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala amplifies, and how He motivates, and how He inspires, and how He echoes. And we all know the story that if death is to intervene and interject and intercede, then you will be written on what you were intended. There can be no doubt that whatever death is written for you, that is where you are going to die. وَمَنْ كُتِبَتْ مَنِيَّتُهُ بِأَرْضٍ فَلَيْسَ يَمُوتُ فِي أَرْضٍ سِوَاهَا. Whatever death is written for you in that location, that's where you're going to pass away. But depending on the life that you led, it will be on that basis that where were you headed. So let's say, نعوذ بالله من ذلك, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for safety and protection, that death is written in a car accident. Maybe hypothetically written in a car accident. Now we cannot avoid it being in that way, and we cannot avoid it being in that situation and in that location and in that precise area, however it may be. But depending on the life that you led, were you going to the masjid? Were you going to visit your mother? Were you going to assist or aid your Muslim brother? Were you going to the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Or on the flip side, were you going to the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Were you going to join in some haram? Were you going to indulge in the prohibitions? So based on the life that you led, that is how, and that will determine that the location may be inevitable. But in what way and in what procedure you are meeting that location. So you make the first step in the way and the path and in the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and see how He amplifies and motivates and echoes. We continue. Then in the 14th verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَرَبَطْنَا عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ رَبَطَ يَرْبُطُ, to tie up, to strengthen, to empower. وَرَبَطْنَا عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ. And when you, the words of the Quran are just too beautiful. وَرَبَطْنَا عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ. And this has been my objective and my mission, that my brother and my sister make that connection with the Quran. Make that rapport with the Quran. Make that relationship with the Quran. Commence your journey of reading and understanding the Quran, so you can appreciate the beauty. And some people, they had told me when I started this little series, that why don't you make it something more practical? Like why did you make it tafsir of Surah Al-Kahf? Why don't you make it a practical thing like the seerah of the Prophet? And yeah, the seerah of the Prophet is very practical. But why don't you make it something more practical, like how to be a better human being? But the objective from this is not that you become masters of Surah Al-Kahf. The objective from this is not that you are now a mufassir of the Quran, or that you now understand usul al-tafsir. The objective from this is just that we can instill in us that desire to build the connection with the Quran. That you can appreciate the beauty and the kalam of the Almighty. Was it not Mu'adh ibn Jabal radiallahu anhu, who was on his deathbed, and his companions, they began to cry. He says, "Ma yubkikum, what's making you cry?" They said, "Nabki ala al-ilm alladhi yanqati'u anna 'inda mawtik." That we're crying on the basis of that knowledge. And Mu'adh ibn Jabal was a mountain in knowledge, radiallahu anhu. We're crying on the basis of the knowledge that we're going to be deprived, that's going to be cut off from us with your death. So Mu'adh ibn Jabal radiallahu anhu, he says, "I'm going, but the Quran is staying. I'm going, but the Quran is staying." And then he says, analyze the information of others through the lens of the Quran. But don't you dare analyze the Quran through the information of others. Analyze the information of others through the lens of the Quran. But don't you dare analyze the Quran through the lens of others. Let me be very clear and very candid and transparent that do not scrutinize the Quran on the basis of science. Science is ever changing. Science is up to evolve. It's up to change. But the Quran is the word of the one who is the most truthful, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So today's science may say that the twig is good for your gum health and oral hygiene and it's good for the mouth and what have you. And I read an article that to give a baby something sweet at the time of birth can actually prove beneficial for the child. But my Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam told me 1400 years ago about tahniq. But if science hypothetically is to revert their claim and say, you know what, now we have a new article that the twig is actually bad for your oral hygiene, or that to give a baby something sweet is something bad, or whatever have you, I will not waver in my faith even an iota, because this is the word of as-sadiq al-masduq. The Prophet ﷺ said it, that's it. Don't scrutinize the Quran by way of science, no. Analyze the information of others through the lens of the Quran, but do not analyze the Quran through the writing of this person, through the journalism of that person, through this article or this report or this or that. No, the Quran is true as is. So he says, I'm just urging you that make that connection and rapport and relationship with the Quran. وَرَبَطَنَا عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ, that we strengthened and we empowered their hearts. And most of the Mufassirun, they say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is now making reference to their interaction with the king. He's bringing the story of the interaction with the king. Now, when you look at a normal storybook, it follows a chronological order. You have the beginning, you have the middle, and you have the end. But the Quran is not a storybook, so it does not follow a chronological order. For example, in Surah Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَإِذْ قَتَلْتُمْ نَفْسًا فَادَّارَأْتُمْ فِيهَا وَمَا مُخْرِجٌ مَا كُنْتُمْ تَكْتُمُونَ. And if you understand the context of this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is bringing the introduction to a story after mentioning the whole story. وَإِذْ قَالَ مُوسَى لِقَوْمِهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُكُمْ أَن تَذْبَحُوا بَقَرَةً, that the murderer at the time of Bani Israel, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings the whole story of the cow and the discussion between Musa and Bani Israel, and then at the end Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala features the introduction, because the Quran is not a storybook, so it doesn't have to adhere to any chronological order. It is a book of guidance, and those stories are featured in the Quran. It's not a storybook. It's a book of ibarah. لَقَدْ كَانَ فِي قَصَصِهِمْ عِبَرَةً, that in the stories of the prophets and those that preceded you is ibarah. It is something that you can reflect on. For who? لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. Albab jam'u lubbun. The one who has wisdom, the one who reflects, the one who ponders, that he can understand these stories and make that rapport with these stories. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not follow the chronological order of the story in Surah Al-Kahf. So he mentioned them, the cave, their awakening, and now he features the discussion between them and the king. So he says, وَرَبَطْنَا عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ, that we strengthen, we empower their hearts. Now, in life, it happens so many times. And on a personal level, so many times as a khatib, you will get up and you will not find the words to say. You will be nervous beforehand. You might be nervous throughout the preparation and you're a little bit hesitant. But through the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the words just seem to flow. Or you have an interview, you have a job, you have some task, and you're not sure how it's going to get done. But with the help of Allah, when Allah strengthens, then let alone the onlookers being surprised, even you yourself are surprised. Then did I really do that? Did I accomplish that? Ja'far ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, standing in front of the king when the Meccans came to indoctrinate him on their disbelief. And what did he say? He says, Ayyuhal Malik, كنا قوما أهل الجاهلية نعبد الأصنام نقطع الأرحام نسيء الجوار حتى بعث الله إلينا رسولا نعرف نسبه وصدقه وأمانته وعفافه فآمنا به وصدقنا. And he delivers the most awe-inspiring lecture to date. He says, O King, أيها الملك, كنا قوما أهل الجاهلية, we were an ignorant people. We were ignorant people. نعبد الأصنام, we were worshipping idols. نقطع الأرحام, severing ties with relations. نسيء الجوار, hurting our neighbor. حتى بعث الله إلينا رسولا لقد من الله على المؤمنين إذ بعث فيهم رسولا. Until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala favored us and He sent us this messenger. نعرف نسبه, we know his lineage, وصدقه, and his truth, وأمانته, and his honesty, وعفافه, and his personality. فآمنا به وصدقنا. Standing in the face of the king, these words are coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you take this step in the right direction, you might be shy, you might be modest, you might be bashful, and it will be Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who will strengthen and amplify and echo and motivate and inspire. Too many times, we are prevented from enjoining in good, and we are prevented from acting on what we are supposed to be acting on because we are too shy. So we're at the airport, and the time for salah has come. There's a lot of people at the gate, and I cannot muster the courage to lay down the prayer rug and begin my salah. So we're at the workplace, and it's Ramadan, and they're asking me, oh, Muhammad, why don't you join us for lunch? And I'm too embarrassed to say, oh, you know what, I'm a Muslim, I'm fasting, whatever, what have you. We are too shy and too embarrassed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, make the step. We will be the ones who empower and strengthen and endow. And with the help of Allah, see the heights that you reach. But when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes that help away, and when He takes that aid away, and when He takes that strength away, and He replaces it with feebleness and weakness, and the tawfiq is removed. The tawfiq is removed. So yesterday, I was able to fast. Not me specifically, but in a general term. I was able to fast the Ayyam al-Bid, the 3 days in the month, and the Mondays and the Thursdays, and the Sha'ban and the 6th of Shawwal. I was able to wake up for a Qiyam, and it was me who was waking up the family for the Tahajjud. But now that tawfiq has been removed, and I'm not talking about if there is a legit illah, if you have a reason, if you have an excuse, old age, or maybe sickness. They are what I call the pension package of Allah. The pension package. Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith, إِذَا مَرِضَ الْعَبْدُ أَوْ سَافَرَ كُتِبَ لَهُ مِثْلُ مَا كَانَ يَعْمَلُ صَحِيحًا مُقِيمًا. Prophet ﷺ said that when an abd becomes sick, or he begins to travel, he's sick or he's traveling, then we write for him whatever he used to do when he was healthy or when he was at his hometown. So the person who's sick, he has a legit excuse. He's in the pension package of Allah. Whatever he was doing, Allah says, we give it to you anyway. But now we're talking about a person who is healthy. He still has the power, but the tawfiq has been removed. Now he's unable to fast, let alone waking up from the tahajjud. He's unable to wake up for the fajr salah. The tawfiq has been removed, and then see how your life begins to fall apart. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect one and all, and He makes us from those who He strengthened. وَرَبَطْنَا عَلَىٰ قُلُوبِهِمْ. So we strengthen their hearts. When? إِذْ قَامُوا فَقَالُوا رَبُّنَا رَبُّ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. When these young men, when these young lads, when these sleepers of the cave, they stood up in front of the king and they said, our Lord is the Lord of the heavens and the earth. رَبُّنَا رَبُّ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. It's easy to say the truth when there's no consequence. But when you're saying it and everything is against you, and the power and the might and the clout is all against you, that is when the truth actually matters. إِذْ قَامُوا, they're standing up and they're on the losing hand. فقالوا ربنا رب السماوات والأرض لن ندعو من دونه إلها لقد قلنا إذا شططا. We do not call onto these other false gods and these idols and these deities, saying that is the absolute blasphemous, preposterous, ludicrous statement. لقد قلنا إذا شططا. How dare we utter such a statement? Now, there was a scholar by the name of Abu Hazim, and he came to see the king by the name of Sulaiman ibn Abd al-Malik. So the king asked him, this is a prominent scholar, he says, Abu Hazim, he asked, مَا أَعْدَلُ الْقَوْلَ? What is the best type of speech? What is the most just speech? What is the most concise speech? مَا أَعْدَلُ الْقَوْلَ? He says, كلمة حق يقوله المرء عند من يخاف وعند من يرجو. He says, what's the best speech? He says, a word of truth, كلمة حق يقوله المرء, a person says it, عند من يخاف وعند من يرجو, to either a person who he's feared from or he's hopeful of some reward from. So this guy, he could fire you if you say this, and this guy, he could give you your job, and this guy could take a loan back, and this guy could give you the loan, but they're on false, and you're there proclaiming the truth. كلمة حق يقوله المرء عندما يخاف. This guy is going to punish you. They're speaking in front of the king. This guy is going to kill you. وعندما يرجو. But this guy, you know what? He's actually going to give you life, and this guy is going to give you. He's going to grant you a job, and he's going to give you this, and he's going to give you that. But you stay true to your roots, and you stay true to yourself and your boundaries. This is the actual truth. He says, مَا أَعْدَلُ الْقَوْلِ. He says, second, مَنْ أَكْيَسُ النَّاسِ. Tell me, who is the smartest of the people? Who is the most intelligent of the people? So he says, رَجُلٌ ظَفِرَ بِطَاعَةِ اللَّهِ فَعَمِلَ بِهَا وَدَلَّ النَّاسَ عَلَيْهَا. You want to know who the smartest person is? The one who adheres to the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He acts upon the obedience and he invites and introduces others to do the same. He says, مَنْ أَحْمَقُ النَّاسِ. Who is the most foolish of the people? Who is the most foolish of the people? Today when we use the word fool, the people become sensitive, and they become hurt, and they take it offensive. If you look in the Prophet ﷺ used the same word in the hadith in Muslim, and if you look at the commentary in Muslim, he says, you want to know what foolishness is? What foolishness is? He says that يَعْمَلُ مَا يَضُرُّهُ مَعَ عِلْمِهِ بِقُبْحِهِ. That a person is doing an action, يَعْمَلُ مَا يَضُرُّهُ. He's doing an action that he knows is harmful. He's doing an action which is harmful, مَعَ عِلْمِهِ بِقُبْحِهِ, despite knowing its detriment. So he's doing an action and he knows it's detrimental. He's eating this and he knows it's hurting his health. He's talking to this person and he knows it's detrimental to his deen. He's enjoining in this action and he knows that it is hurting his iman. With that definition, which one of us are not fools? We're always hurting ourselves. In the Quranic verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. Now some of the Mufassirun say this is the prohibition against suicide. And some say this ayah is referring to a person who killed his brother, and killing your brother is just like killing yourself. And if you look in Jalalain, he writes that بِإِرْتِكَابِ مَا يُؤَدِّي إِلَى هَلَاكِهِ أَيٍّ كَانَ فِي الدُّنْيَا أَوْ فِي الْآخِرَةِ. He says, وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. Do not kill yourselves. بِإِرْتِكَابِ مَا يُؤَدِّي إِلَى هَلَاكِهِ. Whichever can be detrimental to your destruction. أَيٍّ كَانَ فِي الدُّنْيَا أَوْ فِي الْآخِرَةِ. Be it in the next or in this life. In the next or in this life. How beautiful is this deen that it teaches us and encompasses a whole package and the way of living. So he says, مَنْ أَحْمَقُ النَّاسِ. Who is the most foolish of people? He says, بَاعَ الْآخِرَ بِالدُّنْيَا وَغَيْرِهِ. The person who has sold his akhirah just to please the person in this world. Who could be more foolish than that? He says, okay, tell us, ارفع إلينا حاجتك. Tell us what you need, we're going to give you whatever you need. Tell us what you need, we're going to take care of whatever figure you can think of, you're going to have it. He says, حاجتي أن تنقذني من النار وتدخلني إلى الجنة. He says, you want to know what my need is? My need is that you save me from the fire of Jahannam and you enter me into the gardens of Jannah. So Sulaiman ibn Abdul Malik, he puts his head down. He says, ذَلِكَ لَيْسَ مِنْ شَأْنِي. Actually, I can't do that. That's out of my control. I can't do that. So Abu Hazim rahimahullah, he says, مَالِي حَاجَةٌ سِوَى. I don't have any need other than that. So if you can't do that for me, you can't help me. He says, okay, if I can't help you, you help me. Make some dua for me. Make some dua for me. So Abu Hazim rahimahullah, he raises his hand. He says, Allahumma إن كان عبدك هذا من أوليائك فيسره لي وإن كان من أعديائك فأصلحه. He says, oh Allah, if this person, if this king is from your awliya, then make it easy for him to continue doing what he's already doing. And if he's from your enemies, then rectify him and put him on the straight path. So an onlooker saw this, he says, بِئْسَ مَا قُلْتَ. Whoa, how could you say such a thing? لَقَدْ جَعَلْتَ الْأَمِيرَ عَدُوًا. You have made the Amir the enemy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, no. What I said was correct. It is you who is interpreting it that way. Then he says, the king tells him, you know what? We are just enjoying your company so much. Why don't we spend more time in each other's company? He says, I do not like to associate myself with such, because instead of me being a positive influence on you, I am vulnerable to a negative influence from you. I might not be you, I might have a positive influence on you, but I'm susceptible and vulnerable to a negative influence from you. Then he says, back in the day, and he's talking about his time, and he says, back in the day, he says, back in the day, the leaders used to go and visit the scholars. The leaders would go and visit the scholars. Today, the scholars are going to visit the kings. That's why you have both scholars and leaders both in false. Back in the day, the leaders would go to visit the scholars. That benefit from the scholars, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had put them on haqq. Today you have scholars who are going to appease the leaders. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put both the leaders and the scholars in misguidance. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He makes us from those who have understanding and tawfiq, from those who strengthens and empowers and have that connection with the Quran. He makes us from those who are able to speak the truth regardless of the consequence, regardless of the result, regardless of whatever happens. Put haqq and truth on our tongues. Amin ya Rabbal Alameen.